Welcome to Chess Dog. Today we are looking at the King's Indian defense, and we're looking at how to attack with the white pieces, particularly in this structure, the open King's Indian defense. And this structure develops when the pawns on e5 and d4 get exchanged, and you have this particular position. Now, to just look at the structure, it looks pretty good for white, and the structure is a bit better for white. White has more space, black has this weak pawn on d6, so there is a bit of an advantage. Why would black play into this structure? Well, because there are a lot of tactics, and they have weak dark squares that they can target all around white's position. So players of the black pieces that like to play very tactical chess play into this type of position. The good thing for white is that there's really only one major plan. Now, white can expand on the queen side with a3 and b4, but that's small potatoes. The main plan for white is to play f4 and attack black's king side. You can either advance that pawn to f5 or advance the e pawn to e5. Sometimes also you can play this pawn to h3, g4 and f5 and attack in this way. And that is really the main plan for white, to play f4 and advance those pawns on the king side to attack. One plan, but two principles. The principles are: one, try to avoid the exchange of pieces. White has more space, so when you have more space, you don't exchange pieces. And two, keep as much pressure on this d6 pawn as you possibly can. You're trying to keep black's pieces contained a little bit, and by keeping pressure on that pawn, you can keep them sort of in control. Now, if you think you're getting value from this video, be sure to like and subscribe. And I do want to mention that Mauricio Rios' book on chess structures, Mauricio Rios' book on chess structures was a big help for this video. For an example of this plan in action, we look at a game George Meier versus Sebastien Feller, and we see George Meier with the white pieces, a grandmaster, executing this attacking plan to perfection. It begins with knight f3, knight f6, c4, sort of a ready English move order, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4. White plays in this way, this move order, to avoid the Grunfeld, d6, d4 castles, bishop e2, e5, castle, knight b to d7. We have our starting structure for the King's Indian. Rook e1 to protect e4, c6, bishop f1, e d4. So we have our star move for this structure. By taking on d4, black creates the open kid of King's Indian defense. We say kid for short. Rook e8, bishop f4. So white is putting pressure on that d6 pawn in order to restrict black a little bit, keep his pieces from becoming too active. Knight to c5, so black is attacking the e4 pawn 3 times. Queen c2, he defends the e4 pawn. Knight to g4, now the d4 knight is hanging. See, every single move there's a little tactic. That's why black likes this particular type of position. Queen goes back to d2 to defend. Knight goes to e5. And the knights look good, but I don't know how well they work together on these two squares. Rook a to d1, further enhancing pressure on the d file. So sort of put some more pressure on d6. Queen to b6, indirectly hitting the knight at d4, the pawn at b2. Also, there's this idea of coming to b4 and attacking the c4 pawn. The b6 square is a very natural square for the queen in this structure. h3, keeping a knight or a bishop out of the g4 square. a5, gaining space on the queen side and also making it hard for white to kick out the c5 knight by advancing that pawn. That becomes very difficult after that move. Bishop to e3. Now he's preparing his attack. He's put his pieces where he wants them. He's limited black's counterplay. He's put pressure on d6. He's avoided exchanges. So now's the time to begin the attack on the king side with those pawns, beginning with that f pawn. Knight e to d7. If black were to play queen to b4, attacking c4, then queen would be able to go to c1. That indirectly defends the c4 pawn because the knight takes c4, a3, and the queen is pushed away from the knight, and white would win it. So the knight comes back, queen to c2, again having to defend the e4 pawn. It's being attacked again twice. a4 gaining more space, f4. So now white begins the attack. You'll notice that in this position, white's attack has to proceed cautiously and slowly. They know what they want to do, but they always have to worry about these little tactical tricks from black. But if they can keep that under control, slowly but surely, white can go forward with the kingside attack. Queen to b4, putting pressure on c4. The queen hits it. The knight at d7 can go to b6 and hit it a second time. Bishop to f2. That bishop wants to go to the h4 square and control a very important diagonal. Knight to b6, hitting the pawn again. a3, pushing that queen away from its attack on the c4 pawn. Then goes to a5, g4. So the plan continues. White is going to attack on the king side, just as we discussed at the beginning. Bishop to d7, and this is a mistake. And the reason it's a mistake is those two knights, the knight at b6 and c5, are going to need to get back to the king side in order to defend. But the d7 square is really the only square they can use as a pivot point to get back. Now that bishop is sitting on that square, and the knights have no way to get back to defend the king. A better option might have been knight b to d7, knight f3, queen c7, bishop d4, something along these lines, although even here, white can continue with his attack, advancing the f-pawn. So now f5. Okay, so he has his main break. It's going to be the f5 pawn push. It also keeps that c5 knight from going back to e6. Rook a to d8. A better move might have been bishop to c8, so those knights could rotate back, but I don't know how much it matters at this point. Bishop h4, hitting that rook. Rook goes to c8. Bishop back to f2. White gains some time on the clock by repeating moves. And now he goes forward with the attack. Knight f3, moving pieces over to the king, slowly but surely shifting them over. Knight to b3. And that's an example of a knight on the 6th rank. It looks good, but in this position, it doesn't really do anything. All the action is on the king side. Queen to f2, bringing the queen over for the attack. Now, black would love to get queens off the board. Black has less space. He wants to exchange pieces. So a move like queen to c5 comes to mind because that queen is actually pinning the white queen to the king, forcing the exchange. But queen takes queen, pawn takes f6, bishop to f8, then knight takes a4, draws the b6 knight away from the d7 bishop. When knight takes a4, rook takes d7, and if he tries to grab that b2 pawn, then, well, rook to b1 skewers the knights and gets a piece. So black plays bishop to f8. So now he's better prepared for queen to c5. And white doesn't want that, so king h1. Now, when black plays queen to c5, as he does, there's no pin, and white can move the queen away. After queen to c5, white just plays the queen to g2. In the actual game, he played the move e5, which was an error, but black returned the error. Queen g2 is some analysis by Mauricio Rios. White wants to advance this e-pawn up and gain a tempo on the queen at c5 by moving the knight to e4. So black plays the queen away to a5. Then bishop g3, targeting that d6 pawn, and there's really not much black can do. A sample line might be queen c5, e5, de5, knight e4, coming into that f6 square and hitting the queen. If queen goes to e7, then bishop to h4, and the entire position collapses. So this is an example of how white takes advantage of this open King's Indian defense structure. Again, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll have another example of white dominating in the open King's Indian soon. Thanks for joining us at Chess Talk.